Okay, so hopefully the window washer won't return. So I was talking about emotions. So, for example, anger, uh, it's natural course of life, maybe 10 seconds. But suppose we experience it for 30 minutes. I would say that the reason why that anger's allowed to keep going is because we have a lot of thoughts and belief systems that are buttressing that anger. And so similarly, um, if if what was the example that I mentioned earlier? Oh yeah. So if we're feeling really down, maybe the natural down state would last a minute or two at most. But suppose we've been down for a couple of hours or a couple of days, it's likely that there's a lot of thoughts, such as, well, my life is so hard. When will life get easier? My life has always been this hard. My childhood was disastrous, and so on. And we have a lot of these thoughts, and these thoughts are like little twigs that we're adding to keep the fire of depression or feeling downward going. But if we didn't have these thoughts and beliefs, the fire of depression might have extinguished itself in a minute or two. So, but what happens is, so we're regularly supplying the fire of feeling down, or I'm calling it depression, it could be anxiety, whatever, with these thoughts and beliefs. But when we encounter someone who's significantly worse off, all these thoughts are nullified because we're like, hey, wait a minute, the thought that I'm having a hard life is already negated by the fact that this person's got it a million times worse. My life, wait, this person didn't even have parents, and so on and so forth. And almost in an instant, all these thoughts are taken away as if we've removed the wood from a fire. And the fire can no longer keep going, the fire of feeling bad about oneself, the self-pity, depressive sort of attitude. And so the phenomenon is described as we're getting out of ourselves. But in fact, it's not that we're getting out of ourselves, it's simply that we're extinguishing the fire by removing the causes and conditions that keep that fire of that downward feeling going. And so now, why is all this relevant? Because, or it may not be relevant, but tying it back to the very beginning, one of the things I wanted to suggest is that even something, so I want to go back to also this notion of a conceptual split between what's going on in our minds and what's happening out there, or what's happening kind of out of our minds but in our bodies, right? So if we have a split between what's in our minds and what's in our bodies, then we might have this attitude of, well, if I have thoughts and feelings, sure, I can work with them, but with the physical thing, don't you know, there's a physical cause. So therefore, I need to address the physical cause in order to solve the physical malady. Yeah. And so, for example, a common example is that if someone suffers from some kind of depression, they'll say the cause of it is a chemical imbalance. So they've placed the cause as the chemical imbalance. And yet, there's never questioning. I've never met someone who makes that argument, who questions whether that's a causative relationship or a correlation. It may simply be that depressed people happen to have a chemical imbalance, but that the chemical imbalance isn't the sole cause, that one could, it might be the chicken or the egg kind of thing. I don't want to get too deeply into that because it'll start getting a little controversial, and I don't get a lot of angry emails sent my way. But when we constrain our view so that we convince ourselves that things are very solid, that I'm depressed because the cause is a chemical imbalance, and that's how it is. There's no other view of it. That must be the scientific view, even though I'm not familiar with any scientific view that says that that's the actual cause. I would likely guess that if one looked at the literature more carefully, it would be more of a correlation rather than a cause. Or it could be like a chicken or the egg thing. So then their only remedy is to look for a physical remedy for that. Whereas if one takes this more open view of the middle way, one could see that the depression and the various physical ailments are all part of consciousness. They're all phenomena that occur in consciousness. And so if we can create the space for them, they have their own life, and they can arise and they can dissipate. And sometimes they disappear. Even in the midst of very deep depression, we can find gaps. Otherwise, I think people would just have to kill themselves if there were absolutely no gaps, even in these depressive or anxiety-ridden episodes. And these gaps, if we look more carefully at them, may become more and more open. So I'm not going to get too far into that, but let me continue with this essay. So no one I know is immune to shitty thinking or feeling sorry for themselves. Same with physical illness. But there's a tremendous amount we can do in both realms simply through awareness. As I wrote in previous posts, that's referring to one of the posts I put up on my travel blog. These ailments arrive only momentarily. And if we know how to flow with the rest of this movie, referring to life, these maladies can dissipate of themselves. There's nothing we need do to make them go away. They go away on their own when we stop making them real or solid. And to me, that's at the heart of the power and pragmatic value of the middle way. It's this knowing that there's nothing we need do to make physical, mental, emotional ailments go away. Most go away on their own when we stop making them real or solid. And yet I find that let me hold off on that. And so an idea that I want to just mention fairly quickly is this notion or phenomena of self-correction. That you might have observed this in your own life, but generally I would say that it seems as if things have a tendency in this reality, things have a tendency to self-correct. They don't require us correcting it. They have a tendency to self-correct. Now, if I want to impute a force behind the self-correcting and call it God, I would phrase it as, when I let go, God takes care of things. And I think that that's what a sort of a theist is interpreting the phenomena as. But I would suggest that there's no need for a God in all this. Things by their own nature self-correct. And I think that these are two ways of saying the same thing, but some people like to have a deity or a God who steps in and does that for us. But again, in terms of actual phenomena, I don't consider God to be a necessary component of the phenomena, which is that when we let go, things have a tendency to self-correct. I mean, a very silly example is that when I was younger, like in my early 20s, I used to think my parents were the worst. I thought, I observed their behavior and I thought, God, they're so entirely dysfunctional and non-communicative, and I could just list off every psychological, sociological sort of maladaptive behavior onto them. But I was told by a number of people, Yuichi, you should mind your own business. You should focus on yourself because you're quite a wreck yourself. And so I gradually did. And the amazing thing was, my parents over the years became wiser and kinder and amazing and wise people. I mean, to be honest, I don't know if they changed, but that was my perception of things. And so one way to say it is, maybe I got better and I got to see the truth of who they were. Another way is that when I laid my hands off, they just self-corrected. That everything has its own nature, and everything sort of falls back into its own nature, which is wise and intrinsically wise. I think of those little dolls, you knock them over and they just kind of get up by themselves. And I think of life like that. Things have a tendency to self-correct. Now, some might say, well, what about people who commit suicide? Well, we don't know what's going on after death. Maybe that's part of the self-corrective process too. Things might end right there, or maybe there's something going along further after death that we can't see here. So I don't know. I don't pretend to know, and I can't argue that. But generally, in my observation, what I know is that when I let go, I allow for things to self-correct. Another image for self-correction is, suppose that I had a clear glass, and I scooped up some muddy river water, and I wanted this glass, the water inside, to become clear, right? If I want the water to become clear, I don't put it to my ear and shake it. I don't try to push down all the specks of dirt to the bottom to clear it. The best thing I can do is just to put it on a table and just let it go. Yeah, just let it be, and it will self-correct, as in it'll clarify itself. It doesn't require the slightest bit of help from me. In fact, any attempt to sort of maybe blow at it, will actually cause it to take longer to self-correct. And to me, that's a great analogy for life in general, that any attempt to interfere actually slows down the process of self-correction. And the best thing I can do is just to lay off. And that's not just with things out there, but that's also with things in here. I don't have to do anything. I don't have to understand anything. I don't have to figure anything out. I can just be. And that's the hardest thing to do sometimes, isn't it? Just to kind of, so I sit out on my balcony looking out at the scenery and sky, and I kind of want to figure things out, want to get clear. But in the end, what works best for me is just to sit there and allow myself to suffer or to purify, to be baptized essentially through the boredom and the restlessness and the antsiness to arise and to dissipate. And when all that dissipates, I'm clear. And when I'm clear, I have a thought, that intuitive thought that's like, oh, that's the thought I've been waiting for. That's the thought I've been trying to unearth and figure out and dig up. But in fact, all I had to do is just be. I just had to lay off. And I would say that that's part of the phenomena of self-correction. Anyways, so I was talking about this. Let me reread again. So these maladies arrive only momentarily, and if we know how to flow the rest of life, these maladies dissipate of themselves. There's nothing we need do to make them go away. They go away on their own when we stop making them real or solid. I find that moving with the flow, though, is the tricky part. But if we know how to do that, then these things, these maladies of mind, body, and so on, they arise and pass of themselves. And in the next video, I'll pick up from the question of, so how do we flow? Because that's the real question, isn't it?